Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. What do we know about the clash that took place between Indian and Chinese soldiers reportedly at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 9th of December at Yangtse in Tawang on the eastern border with China? And secondly, how serious a clash was it? Those are the two key critical issues that I shall discuss today with the Strategic Affairs Editor of the Business Standard, Col Ajai Shukla. Colonel Shukla, let me start with that first issue. What do we know about the clash between Indian and Chinese soldiers at Yangtse in the Tawang Sector of the eastern border on the 9th of December, which according to the Indian Express happened at 3 in the morning?
Karan, I think there are two sets of things that we know. One is what the government has told us, and the other is what the government has not told us. What the government has told us is, and this especially refers to Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's statement in Parliament at 12 noon today. He says that the Chinese attacked, they came out of their post, they attacked the Indians, but the Indians retaliated. They ensured that the integrity of the post was held, that the Chinese could not capture any territory. The Chinese were not able to, or so the defense minister says, inflict any serious injury on any Indian soldiers. And that after some time, the Indian soldiers forced the Chinese to withdraw into their own post at Yangtse. What the defense minister did not tell us was that there are reports of 35 casualties, out of which casualties on the Indian side I'm referring to now, out of which 7 were seriously injured, which I take to mean had fractures and equivalent injuries inflicted upon them. And they have been evacuated to Guwahati. So it would also seem to me logical to assume that there must have been some injuries on both the Indian and the Chinese side. I mean, if you're sort of actually clashing on the border and the line of control, it's unlikely that either side would withdraw without having taken any casualties or injuries at all. So so far we've got this figure of 35, out of which 7 are seriously injured, and there are also reports of Chinese injuries, but that has not been quantified, or no numbers are available to refer to those.
Let me hereafter rely on the different newspaper reports that have emerged today, the 13th of December. To start with, the Hindu says there were possibly 600 Chinese soldiers present when the clash took place. It says, and I'm quoting the paper, around 20 Indian soldiers and a much higher number on the Chinese side were injured. Your information is, in fact, it's 35 Indian soldiers, 7 of whom are serious. The defense minister says there are no serious injuries. So my first question is, how serious was this incident? The defense minister has said that it was an attempt to change the status quo, but I imagine any incursion would qualify as an attempt to change the status quo. So, how serious was this, particularly if the Hindu is correct in saying there were 600 Chinese soldiers present, and particularly if you're right in saying 35 Indian injuries, 7 serious, and the Hindu says many more on the Chinese side?
First of all, let's keep in mind that this action took place during the early hours when it was still dark. It is it's difficult, really, Karan, and any sort of person who's been in a situation like this would endorse what I'm saying. It's difficult to actually give a number to how many soldiers are attacking you. You're in the middle of a fight. Probably you're exchanging blows with clubs and staves and knives and so on. How can you sort of really have an argument about whether there were 200 or 300 or 400? So I would stick with a sort of a round figure, a general figure, and with my sort of mind open, towards revising this figure if suitable evidence is made available. But it isn't really important whether there were 200 that came or 600 that came. What is important is that the Chinese came and tried to attack the Indian post. When the government now says change the status quo, this is the new vocabulary post Ladakh. Because what happened in Ladakh was that the Chinese captured territory, captured some ground, and then refused to go back, which means they did not. They did change the status quo. And the government is assuming the worst, which is to say that the Chinese is again trying to change the status quo. So I would keep an open mind on the actual figures itself, Karan. Suffice to say that if it's 200 or more, that's up to a full battalion involved in the action, and that's a very serious piece of military sort of aggression indeed.
So, in a nutshell, you believe this is a serious incident, not one that can be dismissed as routine or something that's happened earlier.
This is extremely serious. This is definitely not just a patrol clash or a patrol that is going to exercise its claim up to what it believes is the line of actual control. This is good old full-fledged fighting. Once again, there are no reports of firearms being used, and that's the only sort of saving grace. But other than that, the troops from both sides in the hundreds are clashing and inflicting injuries on one another. Means this is a serious attempt to sort of inflict damage on the Indians.
What do you make about military but unnamed sources telling the Hindu that there were many more, a much higher number of injuries on the Chinese side? How do they know and how can they be certain?
I would only answer that they absolutely cannot be certain of how many injuries there were on the Chinese side, particularly if the Chinese were sort of picking up their injured and taking them back with them as they withdrew. So I would say, and this is a sort of a logical deduction, that the government is trying to put out the impression that while the Chinese were responsible for the aggression, India answered in the way that it should have, and caused casualties on the Chinese that were greater than the casualties caused on the Indians. So it's a sort of attempt to extract victory or to claim victory in a situation which is extremely nebulous and difficult to discern.
Now, the Express newspaper says that the soldiers on both sides beat each other with canes and sticks. Does this mean that, in fact, bullets were not fired, guns were not used?
Yes, that's the sort of unsaid portion of that statement. This is again reflects what happened in Galwan, where people were thrown off cliffs, people were thrown into the river, people were beaten with canes and staves and knives and clubs, but there were no firearms that were used. So to that extent, it's good to know that both the Indian Army and the Chinese Army are sort of exercising restraint in this one matter at least, which is that firearms are not being used. Once firearms start being used, there is a certain anonymity to firing a firearm. You're shooting a soldier at a distance of 100 to 200 meters. It's sort of you can very well dissociate yourself from that and say that this is not a sort of a matter that, I mean, what I'm trying to really say is that the use of firearms would be an escalation towards full-fledged war and fighting and a battle, whereas if they are just using clubs and staves, that is one step short of that.
Now, according to the Times of India, this is not the first time there's been a clash in the Yangtze region. The paper says, and I'm quoting the paper, Yangtze has witnessed frequent face-offs, and the paper specifically mentions one in October 2021. So is this a recurring thing or an unexpected, unforeseen one-off?
This is, Yangtze is one of those flashpoints that both sides are aware of, can easily lead to an escalation, and which starts off, very mildly with patrols sort of confronting each other, but with patrols confronting each other, but not with escalating every time the way it has this time. There are 14 such flashpoints across the line of actual control and the McMahon line. And these are well known and documented, and both sides say they endeavor to prevent this from escalating. So I would say that, certainly Yangtze has witnessed clashes in the past, but so then have Demchok, so then has Depsang. It's just one more in that category of flashpoints all along the line of actual control.
So in a nutshell, this is part of a recurring pattern. It's happened before in Yangtze, but this particular incident might be more serious than the earlier ones.
That's absolutely right. This particular incident and any other incidents which take place now are taking place in the backdrop of this entire Eastern Ladakh set of incursions that took place. And it builds upon the tension that is created by those incursions and makes everything appear more serious and more prone to escalation. And that is the way that if I was sort of asking the generals to do the thinking, that is the way I would ask them to think. And to sort of to understand the importance of not letting situations escalate just in the interests of, taking revenge or inflicting casualties on the enemy. So I think that what you said was absolutely correct. This is something that will be, I'm sure, weighed upon by the generals. And let's see whether they can sort of discuss this and resolve it not in the manner that happened in Eastern Ladakh, because after 16, 17 rounds of talk, that is still a flashpoint.
Let me pick up on that point. Today's Hindustan Times reports that immediately after the Yangtze clash, the commanders on both sides held a flag meeting. The defense minister in his statement said the clash happened on the 9th. The flag meeting apparently happened 2 days later on the 11th. The Hindustan Times says that the flag meeting was held to discuss the issue in accordance with structured mechanisms to restore peace and tranquility. And the paper adds, both sides immediately disengaged from the area. Does that suggest to you that the tension has eased and the matter has been sensibly handled by both armies? Or are you disturbed by the fact that at least 2 television channels this morning, NDTV and India Today, are reporting that the Indian Air Force has detected increased Chinese Air Force activity and on several occasions has had to, in recent weeks, scramble its jets? So sensibly resolved, tension reduced, or is this a worrying situation because of increased Air Force activity and scrambling of jets by our Air Force?
That this incident has taken place at all is a matter of concern for both sides. With senior officers talking in the Ladakh sector, with the sort of the backdrop of what has happened over there, I think the senior commanders in the McMahon line, that's in the eastern Himalayas, sort of bordering Arunachal Pradesh, are well aware of the dangers of escalation and what they need to do to stop it. So to that extent, I would sort of absolutely endorse what you're saying. This is a serious matter. Both sides will understand that it's a serious matter. But the fact that they have gotten onto the dialogue table and sort of held a flag meeting within 48 hours, if you take the outside limits mentioned by the defense minister, is something that didn't happen in Eastern Ladakh. In Eastern Ladakh, the Chinese came in, sat down in very large numbers, and the Indians had to do a full-fledged mobilization to get them out, or to try and get them out. In this side, in the Arunachal sector, firstly, the Indians are there in much larger numbers. It's a very well-defended sector. It's not easy for the Chinese to capture ground in that McMahon line sector. So to that extent, I would say there is, this is something that we need to be concerned about, but we don't need to be actively worried about it. I think the army has things under control.
So what do you make about these two reports on two news channels about increased Air Force activity on the Chinese side and India having to scramble its jets 2, 3 or more times in recent weeks?
The air activity is, there is a no-fly zone on both sides of the McMahon line. And presumably the two sides are staying on their side of the no-fly zone. Scrambling fighters is largely a precautionary move, and a signal also to the other side that we are alert. Don't mistake sort of the peace for something that can be broken. I've also spoken just now to contacts that I have in the Arunachal sector, in the Dirang area. They say there is no increased activity on air activity on that they can see. The flying that is taking place is mainly helicopters that is supplying the forward posts on the Indian side. So to that extent, I'm not overly perturbed by this.
Now, the Galwan clash of 15th June, when 20 Indian soldiers, I believe, lost their lives or were injured, happened some 6 weeks after clashes first happened in the Bangong Lake area. Could we see a similar flare-up on the eastern border 6-7 weeks from now? I.e., is there a sense in which the pattern on the west could repeat itself on the east?
Theoretically, absolutely. There is a sort of a precedent for the same two armies and the way that they behave institutionally when in confrontation with one another. We saw what happened in Ladakh. At the same time, I would warn off against drawing too many lessons from Ladakh, because the mechanisms for flag meetings and so on were not exercised right away. It took some time for the dialogue to begin. Whereas here, they appear to have sort of come down and sort of stopped the fighting very effectively before people were killed. And they seem to have got a dialogue mechanism in place already. So I would say that, yes, we need to be careful. We need to ensure that the Indian side is on its toes as far as the Chinese are concerned. But I don't see a situation like what happened in Ladakh, where suddenly fighting is going to flare up to the extent that 20 soldiers get killed.
Now, this clash at Tawang happened roughly 3 weeks after Prime Minister Modi and President Xi briefly met and exchanged pleasantries at Bali. Is this an indication that their brief encounter did not break the ice?
Karan, this is a no-brainer. The brief encounter is not going to break the ice. Remember that when Xi Jinping came to India, while he was in India and sort of being feted by Prime Minister Modi, at that very time there were clashes going on in Depsang. It's sort of tempting to see a connect and so on, where patterns of behavior are repeating themselves. But I would not say that just because it happened 3 weeks after what was initiated on the Eastern Ladakh sector, that 3 weeks later they were fighting. That does not necessarily mean that 3 weeks after a clash here they will keep fighting. The situation here is different. The Indian sort of deployment patterns are different in the Eastern Himalayas. They are there in much larger numbers. We are well defending that area. And I don't think the Chinese are in any position at all to sort of serve India a lesson or do any of those things that they're so fond of talking about.
Now, Colonel Shukla, the clash happened on Friday, the 9th of December, and if the Indian Express is correct, at 3 in the morning. The country, however, was only informed on the 12th evening. That's last night. That's more than 3 days later. How do you explain this delay? And shouldn't we have been told earlier?
Yes, there is no question about it. Issues like this that have national security implications must be shared with the people, must be shared with the political opposition. Otherwise, the government should have seen and drawn lessons from what happened in eastern Ladakh 2 years ago, where, the entire sort of nation, instead of coming together on a common platform, was sniping at each other. And, the prime minister was trying to, he addressed an all-party meeting and completely gave the wrong picture about what was there, saying that there has never been an incursion into India, no Chinese have come inside and so on, which was proven to be incorrect later. So we're sadly doing the same thing over here. Instead of coming together and sort of displaying unity, the prime minister is trying to sort of brush things under the carpet and presumably hope that the matter dies down on its own.
Now, literally minutes before the defense minister made his statement in the Lok Sabha today at 12 noon, the home minister went public alleging that in fact parliament was being disrupted by the opposition and Congress in particular, because item 5 on the agenda for today, when questions were to be permitted, was a question about the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, and he was suggesting or alleging that that was the reason why the opposition and Congress were disrupting parliament. And then the home minister went on to raise a series of questions about how the UPA government under Dr. Manmohan Singh had handled many things that had happened vis-a-vis India and China between 2004 and 2014. How do you view this attempt by the Home Minister literally minutes before the Defense Minister made his statement?
Well, it's not a secret in this country that the Home Minister is sort of given to politicking at every step and turn. He did the same thing when that Kashmir change of status took place, and he made statements about getting back Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and the Yangtse chain, and that proved to be a complete disaster because it goaded the Chinese into action against India. So I really think that the government needs to come together with the opposition on this. There isn't even an attempt to do so. The attempt is to just give this completely far-fetched explanation that the opposition was trying to brush things under the carpet as far as the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation was concerned. I don't know who's going to believe this and who's not going to believe it, but it's an unhealthy way of doing politics in your country.
My last question. The Hindustan Times today reports that the Indian Army has carried out an overarching reorientation of its forces to sharpen its focus on the LAC. This apparently, according to the Hindustan Times, includes new weapons and systems, construction of helipads, and a strong infrastructure push. Does this suggest we're well prepared if the Chinese start encroaching on Indian territory in the east, as they did 2 years ago on the west?
First of all, I would like to point out that this so-called improved posture and enhanced infrastructure and so on is something that has been carried out over a long duration of time, over sort of with a long-term aim of strengthening our defenses in the border. So that's not something that has anything to do directly with what is happening now as far as these incursions and these clashes on the border is concerned. But suffice it to say that there is sort of an enhanced posture that the Indian Army has adopted in Arunachal Pradesh for a long time, for at least 5 years that I'm aware of. And that has made our defenses in Arunachal Pradesh very strong, very well maintained and well sort of tended to. It's a better posture on the east that we have than what we have in the west in Ladakh. And that is something that keeps the Chinese from sort of being as aggressive here as they are there. So I would not draw sort of any lesson from this, except to say that we must keep our powder dry. We must be prepared for sort of Chinese aggression in this sector, just as we must in Ladakh. And that's the only way to deal with a neighbor like China.
Very quickly, let me pick up on something that was in that answer and get you to confirm I've understood you correctly. We're better prepared for any Chinese mischief on the east in Arunachal Pradesh than we were 2 years ago on the west in Ladakh. Did I pick that up correctly?
You picked it up absolutely correctly. You're very sharp at this, Karan. Except that it's not 2 years, I would say at least 5 years. The Indian posture has been continuously upgraded in the eastern sector. 2 new infantry divisions have been positioned over there, and whereas earlier we used to focus mainly on defending the ingress routes which China came in 1962, based on the naive belief that they would just fight the 62 war all over again. Now there is there are strong defenses on all other places on the McMahon line, and if the Chinese come, they will be confronted and they will be given a bloody battle.
Thank you very much, Colonel Shukla. I simply want to repeat for the audience 2 important things that you've said. You said this is extremely serious. It's definitely not just a patrol clash. And you believe from your sources that there have been perhaps as many as 35 casualties on the Indian side, 7 of which you believe can be categorized as serious. I thank you, Colonel Shukla, for helping us understand what has happened.
Thank you, Karan. Always a pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.